Good morning, guys. Hopefully, you guys really had a good weekend, as I stated yesterday, and hopefully, you're good to your moms. It's really important. If you haven't told your mom over the Mother's Day weekend that you love her and give her a hug, you need to do that. So today we're going to cover period 7, and period 7 is packed with way too much information. But it seems like they could have stolen some from period 6 and put it into period 7. But that's just how it goes. I want to start with where we left off with period 6. Period 6 stops in 1896, and there is some significance there. It is because of the Plessy versus Ferguson. It really kind of caps off that era as far as African Americans, and what I touched on is the Great Migration, which is going to really pick up because of the world wars, World War I and World War II. In America, northern cities are going to be where the manufacturing centers are, and with white men off fighting war overseas, it is going to have to be women and African Americans that fill in the void, and they do so. And this is going to push for the Great Migration. But Plessy versus Ferguson is the doubling down on segregation and Jim Crow in American society. It was a Supreme Court decision that stated that separate but equal was fine, that it was actually justified in the Constitution. This was obviously a really kind of damning event for African Americans, because it's really going to write segregation in the books for the next 50 years, 50 plus years. It won't be until 1954 and Brown versus the Board of Education that's going to overrule Plessy versus Ferguson. And that is going to start desegregating schools in American society, like you have in Little Rock, Arkansas, Central High School in 1957, and Elizabeth Eckford in the Little Rock 9. That's all going to come because of the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision that overrules the Plessy versus Ferguson ruling. I mean, American society was greatly racist at this time. You remember, Birth of a Nation will come out in 1914. It will document, the racism that exists, the fear that exists in Southern society of this supposed black takeover, where roles would, in a sense, be reversed, and the idea of race mixing is rampant in there, and those are the types of fears in the South that were being perpetuated, but also generally in American society, because even Northerners flocked to the theater to watch this movie. So Plessy versus Ferguson was not out of the bound, not out of the norms of where American society was at the time, where the ruling basically said that no white man will ever respect, the laws protecting black men. It's not bringing equality for black people. It's just not something that they were willing to accept at the time. So period 7 is a period that is going to show American growth from east to west coast. It's the idea of manifest destiny. You remember, it happens now. Manifest destiny is going to happen largely because of the fact of innovation, and namely the transcontinental railway system that is going to connect eastern cities to the plains, and the connection of food going from the plains to the eastern cities, and then eastern cities producing goods that were being sold by guys like Ed Sears and catalogs now on trains, where you can order something to the local train station, or even possibly delivered to your door. These are the types of things, again, that start to exist in American society. But there's growth outside of America too, and this is in the form of imperialism. And America's imperialism, remember, was focused on a couple of areas. One, the Pacific Ocean. And the reason why, we were trying to protect our western border, but also trying to influence the rest of the world. But you also have Central and South America. That's where we also focus our attention. it is America, the United States of America, that is going to come to dominate the Americas. It is our sphere of the world, our sphere of influence. And this goes all the way back to the 1820 Monroe Doctrine, where we were saying that, European powers could not influence these anymore, that if they were there, they could stay. But after that, if they lost that possession or, they couldn't obtain others. This was our sphere of influence. So we try to control those areas. Again, South America, Central America, and the Pacific, and we do so. And this expands industries. It also is going to expand America's influence, and it's really where we start looking outside of our borders. It's new imperialism. Old imperialism is the growth of nations from border states and border nations, like we did obviously with the Louisiana Purchase, eventually even with the war with Mexico, and the east to west connection. That's old imperialism. New imperialism is this idea of reaching out and going to other places, taking over those peoples, those lands, and obtaining those resources. Imperialism for Europe is going to be one of the four main causes to World War I. You have the isms and the alliance system. You have imperialism, nationalism, and militarism, and then the alliance system. And what this is going to do is end up causing or raising tensions between these European sides, and eventually this blows up into a world war. Now, this is mainly a European war, but Europeans have taken over a better portion of the world at this point, and those peoples even come to fight in the name of these nations, like British possessions and things like that they've taken over. So this is technically a world war, but it's mainly focused around European powers. And America is not going to get involved in this war until the tail end, the last year of the war in 1917. It will be over a few months into 1918. And it's really going to be a war that is going to see a great loss of life, life that unknown scale, because the military technology, industrialization have increased. But what has not happened yet is the idea of mobility in war. So you have multiple casualties within this war, and the death toll is completely astonishing. You're going to see a war of attrition where battle lines are going to be drawn, no man's land in between trench lines. Both sides are going to dig in. Namely, on the sides, you have the British and the French, who are allied against the rising German power. Now, you also have the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire that are aligned with the Germans, but that quickly goes away as far as the Ottoman Empire collapses in the first year. And the Austro-Hungarian Empire was showing major cracks in its foundation as far as its ability to keep it together. And it will also die within the last year of this war. So you have empires that are going to die off. You have two emerging powers in the British and the French that are going to try to punish, what the Germans had tried to do, in a sense, in causing this war and forcing them to be seen as the aggressor. You had the war guilt clause. You had $33 billion of war debt. You had the victors saying, well, this is time to pay up. Now, there's arguments, too, that this was rightfully so. I mean, after all, the Germans were, in a sense, the aggressors. They were the initial aggressors in the invasion of Belgium. And because of this, the British and the French were able to say, well, look here, this is exactly what happened. And so Germany's case is not going to be one that people are willing to listen to at this time. 4 years of millions upon millions of people who died, and the death and destruction that will happen or follow suit is something that they're going to have to pay for, literally and figuratively. But it is the Americans who are going to join this war in the last year, and it is going to be one that recharges the Allied side against the Central Powers. Central Powers, again, being the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Germans. It is going to be the Americans that help lift up the Allied side, and it is going to be also the Americans, along with the Italians who join in on the British and French effort, who are going to be known as the Big Four at the end of this war. And they get to make the decisions for what happens to the rest of the world, including Germany. And it is the French and the British that dominate the discussions here. Now, America does have input. It is going to discuss the idea of, our own president comes up with a 14 points, Woodrow Wilson, in the League of Nations. In the League of Nations, the 14th point is going to be like the early stages of what we know now as the United Nations. It's there as a culmination of multiple different countries that are going to try to prevent larger wars from happening and chaos from happening and try to keep peace within the world. That's the main point. But our own Senate and House are going to turn away from this notion. The American people don't want to be involved in world politics and really are done with war already within the first year of it. And they don't want to worry about Europe at this point in time. And it is America that is going to start moving into this old form, which is known as isolationism. And isolationism, obviously isolated from the rest of the world, America is going to continue on in the 1920s, remaining in this isolation, and then into even the 1930s, even more so because of what comes in the Great Depression. America at this point is going to go in the 1920s, the roaring 20s, along with the advanced stages now of the Industrial Revolution and new products being put in the home, things like dishwashers and irons and ovens and refrigerators and transportation systems now that exist all over major cities and across America. We are producing things. We are the China of that day. We produce everything in the world, and America has this great industrial power. And to boot, we start becoming the center of economic activity, and even our own Wall Street and the stock market begins to balloon to unimaginable growth. And there's a reason for this. You had people buying on margin, getting loans from banks, 10% down on stocks and not having the 90% to pay when that bubble is burst, which, as we know, will happen. But you also had something else born in America during this time, and it's important to understand. You have popular culture, and popular American culture will spread all over this earth. Think today about all the things that are out there, from Coca-Cola to our movies, to our music, you name it, America, this is where it happens, 1920s. Its influence on popular culture will happen at this point. So the 20s, again, will give way to, obviously, the 1930s and the Great Depression years. And America really becomes isolated at this time. Remember, it starts pulling out of everything, even the Tidings-McDuffie Act, which is going to pull America out of the Philippines in 1934 and allow, the Empire of Japan, the Empire of the Rising Sun, to grow and to exact its influence in that area. The Pacific they're going to start losing their grip on the Pacific, and the Japanese Empire, the growing Japanese Empire, that is an isolated island, is going to start its growth and need more resources for its growing population and growing empire. And it will take over places like China, eventually, again, the Philippines, and multiple different islands scattered about the Pacific. And now this inches us very, very close to World War II. In Europe, it is a complete disaster after 1929, especially for the country of Germany. Germany was getting money from the American government and American banks. And this was a way, again, to prop up this country. And it was helping America ultimately in the end, too. But this is kind of this debt fiasco where you had money going from us to Germany. In return, Germany was paying off its war debts to France and Britain. And then France and Britain was paying off their war debts to the United States of America. So it's this debt fiasco that's kind of going in this circle until it doesn't, because the money dries up with the stock market crash. The Great Depression cut really deep in America. You had 25% unemployment, but where you're really going to see it cut is Germany. It is absolutely appalling there. You have people struggling to eat, to survive, to feed their children, and these become known as bread riots. And when you have bread riots, it is ripe for revolution. In Germany's case, it is going to bring in a horrible man, and this little guy with a funny mustache is going to rant and rave his way into power, that is able to convince a whole German society and beyond that this his way, and even into the depths of the final solution, is what is needed. World War II is, again, largely a European war for the first 2 years. It's 1939 to 1941. It begins in 1939 with Hitler's invasion of Poland. And it is going to lead to Hitler even betraying a non-aggression pact with the other evil in this world, Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union. And he betrays Joseph Stalin because they both invaded Poland. Again, the Soviet Union will invade from the east, and the Germans will invade from the west. But it is going to be Hitler that betrays Stalin and invades in 1940 the Soviet Union. And America is starting to see that the pressure is mounting for it to get involved. But there are still a lot of people who don't want war during this time. You have a lot of Germans that push back in the Midwest. Hitler, the depths of the evilness of the Nazi Empire is not uncovered until the last stages of the fall of the German Third Reich at the end of World War II. When you see concentration camps being uncovered, and there were rumors, but I don't think anyone realized just how, as far as outside of Germany, just the lengths that German society was going to carry out its final solution. But America in this war is going to join in 1941 because of December 7th, the day that will live in infamy. As Roosevelt stated, FDR, again, is going to lead America not only through the Great Depression, but for mainly almost all the way through World War II. And it's because of the bombing of Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. And this brings America into this war. America declares war on Japan and ultimately declares war too right away on Germany. And now America is fighting a war on two fronts, the European theater and the Pacific theater. America would never be able to do the most. There's not another country in this world that would have had the capability to fight a war on this magnitude on two different fronts. It's absolutely amazing what we were able to accomplish during this, and why production. Production was so high in America at this time, American society. These factories overnight turned in from, like Ford turning out cars to now turning out tanks. And this is a mobilized war now. There is movement, and tanks are a big part of this, but you also have air forces and planes that are well equipped now to become fighter jets and have an impact on this war as far as bombings over cities. So this war is going to be completely mechanized, much like World War I, and then obviously way more mobile. And it's the industrialization process of America that allows for this war and the production of it. Now, you're going to see women and African Americans once again joining the workforce. And as stated before, the Great Migration happens because of these two great wars. World War I, the Great War, as it was known in World War II, are going to bring multiple African Americans to northern cities looking for job opportunities. But it also is a way to escape the Jim Crow segregation in the South. But primarily they come for the reason for economic opportunity, which they were being denied in the South because of Jim Crow segregation. So American society is going to, have enough production to fight a war on two fronts. We have, our brave men overseas who are fighting this war, not only in, the European theater, but also in the Pacific against the Japanese in the form of island hopping, right? Douglas MacArthur leads this campaign of jumping from island to island, eventually using the atomic weapon on Japan, which brings an end to this war. Germany will collapse because the Soviet Union pushes from the east. The other allies, as far as the newly liberated French and the British and the American forces and Canadian forces, will start pushing from the west, and they condense down on Germany. And Hitler is going to take his own life along with his longtime mistress and now wife, Eva Braun. And the end of the Third Reich is thankfully over. And you also have now this idea of what this world is going to look like. And before the war even ends, it's pretty apparent. FDR dies in office in 1944 when he is elected to an unprecedented fourth term. His vice president, Harry S. Truman, takes over. And Harry S. Truman is not a fan of Stalin. And he's not willing to placate Stalin, and he's going to push back against Stalin. And he knows he can because he has the atomic weapon. Stalin knows he has the atomic weapon too because he has spies at Alamogordo, New Mexico, where they're testing this. And so you have this really friction between allies that is going to lead to this, what is known as the bipolar world, the Soviet Union and communism in the East, pushing back against democracy and capitalism in the West. And this is going to start the Cold War for the next 50 years. And it is obviously the Americans who are going to win out when you see the collapse and the taking down of the Berlin Wall in 1989 to the total collapse of the Soviet Empire in 1991. But what we know is America becomes this jettison world player because of World War II. I mean, World War I was kind of the starting point, imperialism, the starting point, but it is World War II that pushes it to this great power, this world power that we now know it today, and its wide influence. I mean, guys, we have embassies and really our ear to the ground everywhere. And, you know, economically, when America coughs, the rest of the world catches the cold. We are that leader of this world and still are today, and it's because of World War II. But when you start to look at the other major points, in a sense, of this time period, you can't forget that here in America, there are still some wide divisions between wealthiest individuals and poor individuals, the common man. And we left off with this in the Gilded Age. And the fight is going to lead and spill out into the progressive era. The progressives are going to be some of the greatest grassroots movement, create some of the greatest grassroots movement that this country's ever seen. These people do amazing in as far as creating change without having any real political power. They widely influence and begin to influence American society and take the power away from the wealthiest individuals who are dominating it. Remember, guys, this is ostentatious living. You had just massive disparities in wealth. And this is trying to fix those disparities. But it's also the political system that is corrupted and bought out by the wealthiest individuals. And they're also trying to fix that in the end, and they do. So the progressive era is another thread into everything that we just mentioned. And that goes pretty much from the end of the 1800s, late 1890s, all the way into the 1920s. And probably the culminating thing is what we see is women gaining the right to vote with the 19th Amendment in 1920. So these are major occurrences, in a sense, in that time period, period 7. So that's a wrap, ladies and gents. That brings us to an end of period 7 and the major historical connections. That's the last period. Remember, they are not going to include period 8 and period 9 in on this test. Should you know it? Should you have a clue of it? Absolutely. Look over those notes that we had as far as that document that put out the key outcomes or concepts. But really, in the end, you got to focus your attention on 3 through 7 and know, because they've mentioned it, you can use 1 and 2 on this, which tomorrow I'll talk a little bit more about. There's got to be something to this and what this test could possibly consist of as far as a historical theme or topic. I'll make my guesses tomorrow. You guys have a great day. Join us today at noon. Remember, we are going to have our Quizlet live for those who want to play. Again, I want to award prizes. I got to get those prizes out. I got my bags of candy to our last 3 winners, so I got to contact them and get that going. Let's finish this thing off. We have now just 4 days, guys, before that test on Friday. So keep going. We're almost there.